Indeed, we live in interesting times. The world is changing so fast. It's crazy out there. Kind of sounds familiar. Indeed, I've shared these same statements myself. Some might say it's a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. If anybody's familiar with VUCA, a term that was actually coined by the US Army in the late 90s to prepare troops for combat in the 21st century. A 21st century that was slated to be highly complex, ambiguous. And this concept actually took hold with CEOs and the management literature that said, you know what, this is actually my environment as well. I'm living in this space, doing business is a combat sport in many ways. So if we think about this as the backdrop, here we are in the 21st century, and we're still experiencing this. Indeed, as Louise just mentioned, disruptors are transforming industries. So if you think about it, Airbnb, it's the largest hospitality company, doesn't own any hotel rooms. Uber, the largest transportation company, doesn't own any cars. Facebook, the largest media company, doesn't own any of its content. And Amazon, well, just everything, basically. Mike, I think they're going to take over conferences pretty soon as well, so be prepared. At Mattel, we're actually asking this question of ourselves, and we are indeed being disrupted. And if you think about your industry, it's only a matter of time. In the latest Human Capital Trends report Deloitte put out, as you can see, the vast majority, over 90% of companies are saying that, yes, we anticipate some form of digital disruption in our business. And yet only 30% think that they have the right leadership and skills in order to compete. That is an alarming gap. It's also something I like to call, for chief learning officers and chief talent officers, job security. Because indeed, that is a large gap to close. And as we think about what the future holds, we're finding that 65% of kids are going to grow up in jobs that don't even exist. So how do you prepare a future generation for jobs that aren't even here yet? And indeed, these are the generation that are coming in, and they're coming in really fast. So it begs the question, how do you create lasting change when things are constantly changing? And it's a question that we're having to ask ourselves. And our premise is that ultimately it starts with purpose. Purpose-driven organizations, whether you're Google and you're organizing the world's information, you're Nike, you're bringing innovation and inspiration to every athlete in the world, and if you have a body, you're an athlete. Purpose-driven organizations and companies by far weather the storm of change and are far more resilient on almost every metric. So we've had to go back to our roots, where we started literally in a garage in 1945, a stone's throw from here in Hawthorne, California, among the other icons in the world of innovation. And we really were one of the earliest pioneers of innovation. And over those 70-plus years, we built a company with the world's most iconic brands that should bring a smile to everyone's face, unless you're buying an American Girl doll, because those are quite expensive. But the Barbies, the Fisher-Prices, the Hot Wheels, the American Girls, and a host of licensed product, content, games, and more recently, our foray into digitally enabled toys. So indeed, we've come a long way from that garage in Hawthorne, California, 70-plus years ago, where we have employees all over the planet, on every continent. with more than 70 offices and the complexity that comes with that. But with growth, inevitably come growing pains. And fortunately for us, we're not alone in this, because every company goes through this. There's actually a theory, and it's an interesting one to look up. It's quite simple. It's just the 5 stages of growth that companies go through, from infancy through becoming a large multinational company, of which many of you are. But if you really think about it, the premise is simple. With growth, as you mature in an organization, as your size grows, so does complexity and the crises that you must manage. Intuitively, that makes sense, right? As a startup, your challenges, your complexity, your crises might be more around your funding, how you keep the lights on, how you draw talent. And as you move up that curve, the challenge that you face to grow larger and larger, what do? Systems, policies, structure, in order to provide a backbone for a large organization, which all of us do. Well, at Mattel, what we realized, almost too late, is that those same systems, structure, and policies and practices that made it so great to be the world's largest toy company started eroding the innovation, the speed of decision-making, and the speed in general that we needed to adapt in this changing world. So what did we have to do? Well, we went back to our purpose. And in fact, through a major journey over the last couple of years, a couple of CEOs, a few CHROs, new senior management team, stock price going up and down, business going through its own transformation, we hit the reset button a little less than a year ago and literally launched the company to the company with our purpose, our promise, and our values. And so, as chief learning officers, chief talent officers, you might say, okay, well, that's good. How do you take this almost philosophical concept around purpose, promise, values, which can sometimes be a little lofty? How do you operationalize that in a day-to-day? And for us, it was through leadership behaviors, which is the less fancy way of saying competencies. So how do we take what we hold to be the behaviors that we expect of ourselves and our employees and translate that into leadership behaviors? And at Mattel, we're on a mission to actually drive a mindset that everyone is a leader. Right? Leadership is not title-driven. So how do you do that? Well, we still have this thing called VUCA that's happening all around us. This volatility, this uncertainty. And so how do you build that into your system? Quite honestly, we are in progress in this journey. I think there's a focus group happening now at Mattel as we're still building our model. But I came across a few, I think, apropos concepts that would work here and that are generally well understood, I think, as we think about the leadership behaviors that are needed to operate in this world. This actually came from Bill George, who is the former CEO of Medtronic. He wrote a pretty good article in Fortune magazine earlier this year, specifically around this concept of VUCA, and he calls it VUCA 2.0. And the premise is, through volatility, you need to have leaders who understand how to create, build, and sell a vision. Through uncertainty, you have to have leaders that understand the massive complexity that is around them, but also inherent inside. Through complexity, our keynote this morning, I think, hit it on the head. The courage to not only be vulnerable, but the courage to ask what if and why not, which actually is one of our values. And goes without saying that adaptability, if you don't have a leader that's adaptable and nimble, you've got bigger problems. So what does that look like for us? Well, as we've gone through this journey of translating our purpose, our promise, our values to leadership behaviors, we're also mapping the employee journey and looking at all of the touch points that employees through the front door, through selection, development, succession and advancement, and ultimately engagement. So I thought what I'd do is I'd just double-click on a few early wins we've had and some interesting things that we're trying out ourselves. So specifically on the development side, we've employed a really simple approach that has actually yielded really great results, which we call leadership toolkits. And if you think about them as recipes that leaders can consistently use to drive your given initiative. I think as learning leaders, we're often taught to go with the energy of the group, and you never want to kind of give the answer, right? This is one case where, as we're rolling out specific initiatives, we're finding that giving the leaders a very specific set of deliverables and the tools to do it have yielded an immense amount of consistency and engagement. And we've really employed that with our culture change. We've also been playing around with this concept of on-the-go micro-learning and online learning with great results. In the advancement space, this is really about thinking about how do we actually move high potential development outside of experiences and events and really accelerate them. And action learning, which I think is table stakes in any high potential program, one thing actually has been really interesting is leader-led development. So we're pulling in leaders from the business and putting the onus on them to teach, to lead, to develop content, to run programs. And that has actually been an incredible ROI on the learning, because the language that leaders from the business speak from a learning standpoint is far different than what we would use. And so we're seeing some great results there. And then finally, on the engagement side, we are trying, operative term there, to embrace this concept of ongoing feedback. And that's through our performance management process, as well as our listening strategy when it comes to employee engagement. And so our view is the days of event-based surveys in due time will find its way to the wayside. And a ongoing, regular listening strategy is sort of the way of the future, especially if you think about your incoming population of employees. And it goes without saying that we talk about through change, communication being important, but for us specifically, that was a huge opportunity area for us. So we have just put our communication on overdrive and then taken it and put it on overdrive again, because indeed, it's never enough. So with that, I'd love to say that we're done, that we've figured it out, that we've got the right answer, and I can give it all to you and maybe write a book and sell it at the next conference. But nope, we're not there just yet. The journey continues. We are still experimenting and really thinking about this concept of starting with purpose, building systems and processes that are fluid, that are adaptable versus fixed, and working our way through it. So with that, remember, stay playful and have fun. Thank you.